Hello. So, first off, I want to apologize. The environment of my country had got me distracted for a while. But I think it's time to get focused back on the work. And today, I want to talk about the way the Bible has been used. See, when I do these talks, I talk about it from a perspective that is more used to and more understanding of Christianity. What my hope would be is that somebody who has another faith would see my work and understand the relevance to their faith. So I apologize if it seems like I'm coming off as very focused. But I'd like to talk about how the Bible has been used, historically speaking. I'd like to talk about the church. I would like to talk about the preacher, pastor, priest. Whether you see the church as some great mechanism that was put in place to control us via the spread of the golden rule, or if you think of the church as a home, a safe place, a place to gain the fellowship of people who view the world the way you do, believe me, I understand how valuable that must be. Whether you view the church as a place to be nourished, a place to grow, a place where you can find fellowship and leadership and maybe a direction to point you in on your journey through faith. And I want to talk about the preacher. Whether you see the preacher as the individual person who is striving to grow in their faith, striving to educate others who look up to them, feeling a responsibility for the flock that they have been given charge over or that they have taken charge over. Where is God's focus and power concentrated in this structure? Where is ego in all of this structure? How does it perform? How does it sidetrack? How does it destroy faith? How does it make faith look weak to the rest of the world who doesn't share that faith? And how is it that this infrastructure is utilized by God to grow us? I've been working on this, on a talk on spirituality or faith based in ego. And this work comes out in so many different ways, in so many different areas of work. I feel like I could probably talk about this forever and never actually even get to the subject itself. What is that thing that needs to be overcome in us? And what is it that the infrastructure of faith has given us in order to allow us to do so? I think the most obvious sign to me is that ego's place within all of this structure is based in fear. See, I've often threatened about doing a talk just on the word deserve, because it's something I could go on and on and on and on about. It's like that spirit based in ego. They're so closely related. See, deserve is the mechanism that allows ego to thrive in a fear-based environment. If you are in an environment where fear is a primary driving factor, deserve is what allows ego to thrive in it. You can't get to the underlying problems that we face, that we have to overcome in order to survive and thrive on this planet. Instead of just surviving, thriving on this planet, there are certain things in place that we have to overcome. And that fear, that ego, fear, deserve. Deserve is a mechanism that allows ego to thrive in an environment of fear. Those three factors, that causal link, is one of those things that we need, that indicates to me the fallen nature of mankind. It is one of those things that needs to be overcome. And I understand that the way the Bible has been used, there is only one way to get past being fallen. We are hopeless. We are helplessly lost in it. And the only way to overcome it, as told in the Gospels, is through Jesus. So, what does that mean? When I ask you, do you believe it is possible for all of humanity en masse to have missed the point? What does that mean if it is possible we have missed the point, and deserve is the mechanism that allows ego to thrive in an environment of fear? What role has that played in the way the Bible has been utilized, understood, organized, related? What role has that played in the church? What role has that played in the pastor, priest, elder, what have you? That is what this is about today. Keep in mind that deserve. It's very important that if you are in an environment of fear, that deserve is not just, well, I deserve. What do I deserve? I deserve X, Y, Z. It's also, what do others deserve? Does that person deserve to be elevated? Does that person deserve to burn in hell? Is the actual mimetic act of feeling another individual deserves to burn in hell, is that ego? I believe it is. Now, to do this discussion, I'm going to fall back over some ground I've covered before. As I have said, and as most people already know, science is something that came out of the church, came out of faith. It was originally men of faith, usually well-to-do men of faith, or just weirdos that are outliers on intellectual curves, would go into nature and try to understand the complexity and wondrous nature of God via the things that he created. This frustrated a lot of scientists. You see, how things work in a mimetic evolution like ours is that the things that were important to the first people to think a thing fall away as future generations think that same thing. So a lot of annoyances that were in science in the beginning were things like trying to explain things that don't exist, like ethers and spiritual powers, stuff that were not calculable, discoverable, anything like that. They didn't make sense, and they were continuously being added into scientific discovery via trying to explain them. And what this causes scientists to do is to just say, you know what, we're done with this. We're not going to allow any of these outside forces that we assume exist, allow them to shape the direction in which our discoveries actually go. And by doing that, the discovery is moved so much faster. When you take a thing away and discovery increases, you assume that the thing you took away was detrimental, that it was probably false. And you see that today still in science, where if a scientist believes a certain way, there is an increased chance of criticism and not acceptance of their findings. It still goes on today, and it has gone on all along. As the generations of scientific discovery went on, we made one of the biggest discoveries, probably the biggest discovery in all scientific advancement, the discovery of genetics. Our first, the replicator we discovered first. Genetics, the physical replicator, the replicator of living matter. Genes. We discover genetics, we discover evolution, microevolution. We project into macroevolution, but we've discovered microevolution, survival, adaptation, and mutation. This is an enormous discovery for us and the focal point of where we've gone astray. I'm starting the history here, and I will loop back around to it, but I want to start here because it's important to set up this experience of what I expect 1,000 years on a new earth to be like. So this discovery happens. And instead of us using it to increase the wonderment we have for the creation, it spawns this new religion. I think this is the sign of that generational gap, where the thing they eliminated must have been false. So this discovery was only possible by eliminating it. So therefore, in our progress, our trajectory of progress continued on. And what ended up happening was a discovery that was found by men of faith was turned into a new faith. This has several effects. For one, it reinforces the idea that those things we were searching for before are bad, false, or just make believe. This new discovery reinforces our ingenuity, our creativity, our ability to look for answers without having to have this higher power. Those discoveries and that kind of thinking created animosity between what was religion and science. Now there is animosity between the two because science has discovered that it thinks its purpose is to get rid of God, to make it so that God is irrelevant. That thinking and the trajectory it sets us on for finding this scientific discovery leads to our second replicator that we've discovered. The second replicator we discovered is memetics. It is a mental replicator. The way in which genetics, the first replicator we discovered, affected our scientific thinking going forward, affected the definition of and explanation of the discovery of the second replicator we discovered. When Richard Dawkins discovered memetics, our second replicator, mental replication, he was so immersed in a world that wanted to get God out of the picture, to finally overcome that ignorance in our species. That's the world he was immersed in. So when he described the replicator he discovered, he described it in such a way that it would fulfill that purpose. It was never said better, I don't think, than Susan Blakemore in her TED Talk about how understanding the replicator that is memetics makes God irrelevant. You no longer need him. Between genetics and memetics, everything is explainable without God. That was the ultimate logical conclusion to that line of thinking. So going forward with those two discoveries, now scientific thinking is all that magical stuff that's non-productive, that is bad, that is ignorance, is reinforced in the discovery of and definition of the second replicator. And this struggle between what we would call faith and science, which is the more science becomes a religion, the more faith-based it is. And you're seeing that today with this woke bullshit. Woke is the spirituality based in ego for those people who don't have faith in a higher power or have a vague faith in a vague higher power. Defining this discovery the way Richard Dawkins described it allows him to write and sell books like The God Delusion. Understand that the scientific purpose going forward, once those things are deemed irrelevant and irrational and just irrelevant, they were things slowing us down and now we're leaving them behind. You understand what the scientific definition of awakening would be is to eliminate that belief in God. No wonder there is a struggle between the two faiths. One is actively trying to eliminate the other one's existence, while the other one, so far, hasn't had any way to keep up with the advancements and the learning and the discoveries that have gone on while science continues along its current trajectory. How does somebody of faith who believes in God answer all of these things that have been coming at them over these years? And they're telling us that these things are proof that God does not exist or that you don't need a God. Of course the animosity is growing. Of course the fear is growing. And what allows ego to thrive in an environment of fear? Deserve. The church response is that feeling of being threatened. An environment of fear often feels like you are threatened. And we see that too all over in our society. There's a war on everything from Christmas to babies. And I understand the merits of all of those arguments, and I understand that. Look, I'm trying not to get sidetracked by politics. It's been that kind of year in the United States. But do you see the size of that environment of fear? That war on everything you believe? Science is proving that God does not need to exist, and you fervently believe, you have faith that God exists. Of course you feel threatened. You are in an environment of fear. Well, that is the environment that is being set up for you, for us. Because a lot of us overcome it. A lot of us don't succumb to the petty violence and the anger. I do when I'm driving. My goodness, do I when I'm driving. Remember that deserve is how ego thrives in an environment of fear. What is it that I deserve? What do I deserve? What is it that they deserve? What does that person that cut me off in traffic deserve to? What does that dictator that got elected deserve? What is the power that the dictator we got elected deserves? Forget politics. Look, I am trying to do another talk that talks about faith based in ego. One of ego's greatest tells is fear. One of fear's greatest tells is deserve. Fear can be so loud that it's just a part of the environment. The best way I can describe this, the best analogy I could give you for this is I have what is called tinnitus. It's a ringing in your ears that's just constant. It's always there. There's no cure for it. When I was a kid, I remember when it first started, it was so miserably loud. There was no way to ignore it. It was just torturous. It was so loud. It would make you angry because you're frustrated. And when something is omnipresent in your environment at all times, like that ringing or like fear, eventually you find mechanisms that allow you to sort of just put it below the threshold of actual conscious thought. I can ignore my tinnitus because I've learned to adapt to having that ringing. If I wanted to, I could turn off all white noise and I could just listen to it. I do that in meditation all the time. But when fear is so loud, it just becomes the background noise. You could say that you are not living in fear, but every meme that you repeat as you grow or stagnate your consciousness is just the fear, the memes that are coming out of fear. Like they're coming after you this, they're coming after you that. This is what the world is doing. They're trying to destroy my beliefs. Those are fear memes. Those are things that you are, the definition of consciousness. What I'm talking about with a mental replicator in memetics is an organic process that is memetically driven or fueled. If you are repeating memes that are based in fear, like those I just mentioned and many, many, many others, you are repeating memes based in fear to grow or stagnate. If you are choosing them, analyzing them, taking what is from them that is usable, maybe you are being memetically fueled. More often than not, especially in a world filled with people that don't understand how algorithms work, in how they are delivered, some of these memes, more often than not, most people are being driven. They have made a conscious choice that this is the path they are on, and everything they repeat in their consciousness is just handed to them and reinforces everything they already know to be true. That is being driven. You are not in control whether you think you are or not. That is being driven, not fueled. And when the environment is fear, it is so loud and powerful that you've turned it into background noise and are being driven. We see those results in the world today, right now. It is being manifested in our politics, which I'm trying very hard to avoid. It's being replicated in how we collect, organize, and share our data. It is so omnipresent that it is the thing being utilized by algorithms. It is the most profitable thing to use because it is everywhere. It has never been more obvious. There has never been more data to show us that fear is everywhere than there is right now. The work product of that environment and the way in which it's being used is showing itself in so many enormous and spectacular ways all around the world. Not just here, not just in our politics or in our churches, not just in our homes here in the United States. It is going on everywhere. It is going on everywhere, in our churches, in our families, in our jobs, in our corporations, in the way we project for the future, for how to survive and invest money. It's in our daycare, it's in our elder care. It is everywhere. Consciousness is an organic process, mimetically driven or fueled. That is our minds, and our minds right now are in an environment of fear, and the best way for ego to thrive in an environment of fear is by deserve. I'm trying to show the symmetry of this. Why is it that it is everywhere and none of us seem to talk about or say it? All right, so the story. The church, out of which grows religion. The church, out of which grows science. Science, which makes a discovery in our first replicator, the replicator of living matter, genetics. Its discovery leads to the second replicator, our second discovery of a replicator, which is memetics, mental energy, conscious substance. And it not only led to its discovery, but it led to how it was framed, okay? How it was described by its discoverer, what it ultimately means for the discovery and isolation of science going forward, the focus of science. And remember that with that focus in science, the goal must be to make that ignorance of the necessary existence of a God become irrelevant. That is awakening on the scientific trajectory. So, the first one we discovered, living matter, its replicator. Second one we discovered, mental energy, memetics. Genetics first we discovered, memetics we discovered second. Because this is the order we discovered them in, does not mean this is the order in which those levers came into existence in our universe. If the properties of our universe are such that living matter, physical replicators, or genetics function this way, and if it is a property of our universe that mental energy, memetics, the replicator of that energy, functions this way, the fact that we discovered the physical one first does not mean it predates the existence of the mental one. I assume that there is probably one or more in energy. That's yet to be discovered or understood. But what if the one we discovered second predates the existence of the first one we discovered? Mind before matter. If we are created in God's image, God is that higher form of the mental replicator. It is a higher form of consciousness or mind. If it predates the physical replicator, living matter, genetics, then it may also predate this Big Bang. Our science tells us that the origins of this universe is likely to have come in a singularity where everything was compacted really tightly and exploded, allowing for all of this. But that's physical matter and energy. If consciousness existed before this Big Bang, if there was a bang, then mental energy may have been the cause for the bang itself. If consciousness existed before matter, was it a catalyst for that, or a catalyst for that Big Bang, if there was a bang? And is that consciousness, that mental replicator, if that has been in existence and we are a copy of it, what are its goals? What is its purpose? What is it doing here, and why does it look the way it looks from our perspective? This is a good time to reiterate one of my most important tools in meditation. This is the concept that size defeats us. It's a common, ordinary concept, but it's to understand how much size defeats us allows me to use that tool in meditation, allows me to better understand how fractal math works, allows me how to... You can't see generational change as it relates to fractal math and as it relates to mimetic growth without understanding the idea that size defeats us. You need to have a perspective that allows for conceptualizing. It allows you to work within a framework that accounts for and learns from the fractal nature of how entropic and creative energies interact and work and use each other in order to create the future. Understanding that size defeats us is very important for this part of the conversation, because right now, where I am talking to you from in the world today, that is what's happening to us, to humanity. Size is thoroughly defeating us, and we are choosing to recognize and continue to live in this environment of fear. This is the only way that human beings can remain righteous and still destroy their own environment. You don't get garbage islands in the oceans while feeling righteous about it. You don't get to be a farmer who is destroying the lungs of the planet and saying, well, if people died, that's God's will. Bad things are allowed to happen because God wants them to happen. You cannot remain righteous and destroy your own God-given purpose on this planet without size really kicking your butt. And that is where we are right now. Try to step outside the size in which you view the universe. Understand that if it is possible that the second replicator we discovered predates the first, mental energy predates physical energy. Mimetics predates genetics. Mimetics may have even caused genetics, created genetics, understood its own importance and its own significance, and decided to replicate itself in other ways, such as instead of mentally, physically, instead of physically, in energy. If it is possible that mind before matter, as I believe and many other people do believe, whether it's this specific or not, what is the significance of it? What is it that a mental replicator, consciousness, mind, what is it that that thing wants? What is it going to do to grow, to propagate itself, to find more perfect understanding, to understand more and discover more? Because that's what replicators want to do. They want to replicate and grow. What would you do if you could put yourself in that position? You are a mental replicator. How are you going to grow? If it is that you decide to cause something like we suspect is a Big Bang, how big is the universe you created? How much can you utilize the actual matter that exists to expand yourself in? How big can consciousness get? How big must that consciousness that predates matter be now that it has had all of this matter to work with for all of this time? It's also important that you understand time, because here's a little something you may not have thought about. Once you leave this planet, this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months in a year, this doesn't matter anymore. Once you leave here, that's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It has no relationship to the environment you find yourself in once you're gone from this place. How much time has really passed in this current universe? If you are a mental replicator, how are you replicating yourself in the environment, in the universe? So when I say this iteration of consciousness, which is what we are experiencing right now, we are in this iteration of consciousness. Because the universe is just too vast for this to have happened one time and one time only. There is too much available matter, and replicators have the desire to replicate, that if there are other environments that are conducive to growth of consciousness, then it would grow in those environments. This iteration of our consciousness, this iteration that is our consciousness, started in a garden. With the best research I have found, which was done by Julian Jaynes in his Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, our iteration of consciousness began in a garden, and it began with a being that was probably bicameral, according to his definition and his research. The bicameral being did not have this consciousness. It had an interaction with the larger consciousness that was far more one-on-one. It was far more, that larger consciousness was far more directing. It did a lot more interacting and directing the direction of our progress. So in the beginning of this iteration of consciousness, we were bicameral beings having a much more interactive conversation with the higher form of intelligence that created us. That higher form of our intellectual replicator, our memetics, that higher form of our mental replicator had a design or plan for us. The reason I say that is our history points to it. Those individuals were alive and living in a garden, and in that garden was also a tree. That tree was off limits and produced fruit. It was a fruit-bearing tree. The function of that fruit was to introduce this second replicator, memetic consciousness. That's what the tree was for, and we were not supposed to touch it. When our bicameral ancestors, see, I only call them that because the best research we have done so far, that's what that research calls it. But understand that all the research that has been done, including that research, was done in such under that influence of scientific advances by deeming certain things irrelevant. That's why I call it bicameral, because it is the best reference I have. I don't know what those beings were like. I don't know what that specific garden was like. I don't know what that tree looked like. I don't know what that fruit tasted like. But I know that there were those individuals. According to our history, there were those individuals. There was that tree and there was that fruit. We weren't supposed to touch it, and we did. I have speculated that fruit may not have been ready for us, or we may not have been ready for that fruit. But either way, the results of that, we shifted from plan A to plan B. And plan B has been a freaking nightmare. It's not gone well. I don't know if it was our early jumping the gun there with that fruit that made it so that this journey we're on right now would just be plagued by an environment of fear, our egos being the overwhelming thing that wants to survive. An environment of fear, the way it survives is through deserve, and that has led us to everything from inquisitions to jihads to that higher intelligence wiping out vast swaths, almost every bit of genetic productivity on this planet. It's been a bad road to follow, but it's the path we're on. Ego, fear, deserve, jihads, inquisitions, power, righteousness. The human version of righteousness is ego. Humans are not righteous. They only desire to be righteous through their egos. If it is something you think you can attain for yourself, it is most likely based in ego. And if you think they deserve it or you deserve it, it is almost assuredly based in ego. So understand that that is the environment in which the higher form of our mental replicator, the higher form of our consciousness, has to operate. That is the environment it has to operate and interact with us in. I started out by talking about how that Bible is used. And I think this is where it can be illustrated best, that we have been looking at that out of context. The entirety of the book was sometimes written, certainly organized, and utilized from then on out of context. A complete missing of the point. The Bible is a history of that higher form of consciousness, its interaction with us within this environment. Remember, and this environment is ubiquitous with fear, ego, and deserve. But that's the environment it has to work with, because that's the environment its creation is in. For me, there is no better illustration of this than the book of Job. Before my conversion, whenever I wanted to just make the arguments of anybody else who believed in mind before matter, if I wanted to make their arguments irrelevant, all I had to do was remind myself of Job. It made no sense to be anything other than a human perspective. The story needed to be a human perspective to me before my conversion. I did not understand. And now that I do understand, I sometimes find myself wondering if the happy ending for Job wasn't a bad idea. And now I understand that what I just said is an enormous red flag for me about my arrogance. I did not understand the circumstances that Job and God and the devil were in for this story, and I was not there. So who am I to say in my ignorance that it was a bad call? But it seems to be somehow related to that origin of magical thinking, that well, life isn't fair and some terrible things can happen to you, but it's going to work out in the end. Because quite often, it really does not. But that magical thinking, and maybe that was the point, the growth of consciousness from then on was in or allowed by that magical thinking. It doesn't always work out. And in fact, without faith, that story looks really ridiculous. But with faith, understanding that there is a purpose for us designed by a higher form of consciousness, that story makes more sense. And in fact, I start thinking it should be harsher, which is my ego. Really, in reality, Job was one industrious guy. He would have so much, have it completely ripped away and build it right back up again. Not to mention this guy's sex drive. He had a lot of children and then lost them and then did it again. I mean, if anything, you should have respect for this guy. Incredibly industrious. So there we are. There is a fallen world. There is a fallen creation. There is ego in an environment of fear, thriving because of deserve. And that is throughout the creation. The next move, the next great interaction is the setting aside of an example, of a people for an example. The interaction of a higher intelligence, a more advanced mimetic process than ours, says, I'm going to set this group of people aside. I'm going to give them a structure that they can repeat. I'm going to make it simple so that it's easier for them to repeat and it has a greater chance of survival. He creates his people. His people create a specific, organized, spiritual structure. Within that structure is a lot of blood sacrifice. As sort of a side note, if I was to encourage somebody who understands what I'm trying to say here, I would like to understand I would like to understand more deeply the mimetic changes that happened via or because of blood sacrifice. Because there is nothing a higher consciousness needs from that. There is no way in which it's being satisfied or benefited by us doing that. The only way it benefits is if the creation or the beings that is having do that are affected in such a way to guide them in the direction you want them to go in. Setting aside that example in that way makes more sense and really no sense any other way. It had to be a design and there had to be a purpose. What if somebody were to do this experiment that has more understanding of the depth of change we've gone through because of that? I would really like to know. I don't have that work. Maybe I will do that work. I don't know. But the main point is the environment that is set right there. The fear, the ego, the deserve. How is that higher power going to shape its creation to go along a path that would allow it to find redemption, that would move it forward? What it does is set aside a people, give them structure that allows them to understand sacrifice until the ultimate sacrifice, which was Jesus, which is the culmination of that work. That work no longer is required to do. We don't need to do blood sacrifices because the blood sacrifices we did of our prime animals was to allow us to understand the sacrifice that is done in Jesus. All of the work that led up to the culmination in the sacrifice of Jesus, all of the wars, all of the rebellions, the redemptions, the prophets, the setting back of the people, the building up of the people, trying to reiterate the importance and the direction that has been given. Remember, all of this is taking place in that environment of fear where ego survives best through deserve, culminating in that ultimate sacrifice, the point of which was to give us the only tool that can curb that side of us, that ego, fear, and deserve. The only thing that can stop it is the gift we're given in that ultimate sacrifice, which is empathy. The point of the sacrifice to save the creation is empathy. It's the only thing that works to defeat fear. Look at the story as it leads up to this great sacrifice. Jesus is doing his work. I want you to understand something about what Jesus was while he was doing his work. This guy is walking around the Middle East. He knows, because he is God, that underneath the ground he is walking on, there is a substance that can fuel economies and civilizations like the one we have. He knows it. He knows what can be done with it. He is led up to mountains and tempted by the devil by things like all the kingdoms of the earth. This is not a temptation that would appeal to somebody that knows the things he knows. It is a temptation that would appeal to somebody understanding the story. Eventually, because not many people understood the story while the story was playing out. He was constantly doing good things and telling people, look, the fact that I did the good thing is not the point. The fact that I could recognize there was something I could do of benefit to good, the fact that I recognized it and did that, that's the point. Don't go around bragging about what you did. Understand why it was necessary to do it. And that culminated in Jesus being paraded into the city. They were hoping as a conqueror, but he was coming into the city as a lamb for slaughter. And the ego of the people present at the time, being based in an environment of fear and surviving through deserve, cried out for a thief and murderer, Barabbas, and cried out to sacrifice Jesus, which ultimately led to the only thing that could solve the problem that led them to do so. They were ego-based, living in an environment full of fear and thriving through deserve, crying for Barabbas, and the result of which was getting the one thing that could stop that behavior from happening: empathy. Look, in my meditation, the idea that size defeats us is important to me. It's crucial. It's vital for me to make successful discoveries. We cannot move forward and conquer this environment of fear that is driven by our egos and their egos thriving through deserve. We cannot do that without the gift that was given, which is empathy. All of that, ego, fear, deserve, all of that is the reason he came here, the reason he did. He lived like this. He put up with us. He embraced us and sacrificed himself to give us the one tool that was useful in overcoming this situation. And here we are, 2,000 years after that gift. And 2,000 years after that gift, ego, fear, deserve are still as omnipresent as they always were in our environment. They're still here. They're so strong that one of the most powerful religious movements, macroevolution, has within it a goal of giving an awakening to people, that awakening being making it so that they understand God is irrelevant and just fantasy. But if you're familiar with my work, I believe that awakenings are a weird thing. We find ourselves at a point where finally we have the data to understand these things, to understand the thousands of years of struggle that has led us to this day. We understand the fundamentals, some of the fundamentals of how this universe functions. We are able to formulate a plan for why we are what we are, where we are. I certainly don't think that religion itself understands this, because that fear is still so ubiquitous that the majority of people I know are arrogantly going from one book to another, flipping things around to explain each other and reinforce what they already believe, to try and set their ego up so that they are assured, they are certain that they are right in their beliefs. And the majority of them, they are actively praying. Their conscious and mental energy is bent towards the idea that they want Armageddon. And they want it like yesterday. They are certain it probably started yesterday. How much more of an indicator do you need that your ego is, that our ego is trying to thrive in an environment that is ubiquitous with fear? I don't know how much more data you need to understand that. I think it's funny that those two discoveries of replicators and how the universe probably functions created this very powerful faith system that rivals, certainly in our societies, rivals that of what was everywhere before, the belief in a creator and that there was a plan, there was a purpose. That discoveries that led to that enormous faith, all we have to do is understand that we are missing the point. If mind before matter, genetics and memetics are just tools of a consciousness greater than our own. Think about it this way. By doing this talk, I am speaking into consciousness, a structure, a recognition of a structure. I don't actually need you to understand it. I don't need you to like, share, subscribe, and spread my name, be an influencer. Just by understanding it, I am putting it into consciousness. I have already won. I've crossed the finish line. The point of having crossed that finish line is to see how many more people I can help to cross it with me. That's it. I've already won. I don't need to do this. I don't need millions of people to see it. All I need is to share it and help other people win. Failure to recognize the situation and environment I've just described to you over nearly an hour leads me to my final point. 1,000 years on a new planet Earth. Just imagine with me that you understand this perspective. You understand what I'm laying down for you here. That book was organized in that environment. It was utilized in that environment. It has been understood and translated and compiled and shared in that environment. In an environment where I've asked you, do you think it's possible for humanity en masse to have missed the point? Let me give you an example from the book. The entirety of the book of Revelations is often thought of as like this prophecy of what it will be like in end times. What if you flip that on its head? What if it's a warning? Like, the closer you get to this stuff being true, the closer you are to having your iteration of consciousness fail. Because a lot of the things that we see in that book, in Revelations, are easy to see in the world we live in today. It is easy to recognize, oh, well, that's certainly happening. Oh, well, that is definitely happening. All we need is that to happen, and we're on. It's on. What if it's a warning that says, look, if you're seeing these things, you are close to failing. So we get to this idea that Armageddon has happened. The rapture has happened. Those who believe, those who were not willingly ignorant. And I really want you to question what that means, what it means to be willingly ignorant. I suspect it has a lot to do with that environment of ego, fear, and deserve. I think if you notice a lot of those three things going on in your conscious reflections and growth or stagnation, it might be that you are missing the point. It might be that you are willingly ignorant. But if all these signs come to pass and the world ends, those who are raptured and those who came before that would have been raptured if they had lived long enough will be on this new earth for 1,000 years with a new body. What I suspect will happen, if this comes to pass, is that that higher form of intelligence, that more advanced mimetic replicator, that mind, will grasp you by the shoulders and say, "Isn't this wonderful? See, you came from a species that was fallen. And that fall is something your people never quite got over. So your iteration of consciousness failed. But this is what was possible. This is how you could have thrived. But grace is a wonderful thing." See, because we have all of the data we need to make this planet an Eden. We have all the data, we have all the motivation, we have all the desire, we have everything we need. We have the material sciences, we have the understanding of genetics and environmentally stable systems. We know and can discover what we don't know about how individual parts of environments interact and reinforce. We can recreate strong and weak natural environments. We can adjust the genes inside of our plants so that they grow specifically what we want. We have everything we need. Everything. And we have that warning. If you start to recognize these signs in your civilization, your iteration may be coming to a failure. Recognizing of what I've just given you is the only way to use the tool you were given, that empathy, to overcome the ego surviving through deserve an environment of fear. That's our chance. We have the data, we have the tools, we have the resources. It's really just on us. That's what I suspect it will be in that 1,000 years. Because imagine our species void of having to survive day to day, food, shelter, clothing, void not having any of that, being able to live for 1,000 years, understanding proper focus for a mimetic replicator like our consciousness, the environment, the freedom, the open-ended discovery. In 1,000 years living like that, what will we accomplish? What could we accomplish if we went through one of these weird awakenings and understood what we've done, why we've done it, and how we got here? All right, that's an hour. I really wanted to not do these hour-long videos, but here I am. Odds are most people won't get to the actual end of it. Which is sad because I actually made a point for a change. So, thank you for your time.